You're muted. Hi, everybody.
Sorry about that. I was having a mute problem there.
I'm
Good morning. Way
not
to
the only
start the
one.
show. One of those moments of time. Good morning, everybody. Welcome so much to Humanity's Team live event. This happens every Wednesday, and we're so excited to be here with you today. Every Wednesday holds new topics and guests that are going to open your heart and your mind to a new awareness and conscious state of living. My name is Jacqueline Way, and today I will be your host along with the esteemed Dr. Rowshanak Hashemiyoon, who's right there with me, not beside me, but I think below me. Good morning, Dr. Rowshanak. And we're standing today in place for Steve Farrell, who is usually here, but he is now on holidays with his family, and so well deserved. But we're so happy to be here with all of you. Dr. Rowshanak and I sit on the Board of Advisors for Humanity's Team, and we're excited today to have today's conversation, which is called The Physics of a Meaningful Universe. And we're going to be digging into that in just a minute. We want to first welcome everyone from Humanity's Team, Humanity's Stream Plus, everyone who's out on social right now. How are you today? And everyone who's in the room with us also. We're always happy to have a live audience with us. So welcome, everyone. We're really happy that you chose to be part of this heart and mind opening conversation today. Everything we do at Humanity's Team literally works towards changing humanity's future. There are endless free programs, our masterclasses, our revolutionary streaming platform is absolutely amazing. Humanity's Stream, we invite you to go check it out. And coming up soon, in just a few months, is the Global Oneness Summit, which we're excited to announce and get started on for October. So make sure you're going to have some of October free. It's going to be a week-long summit that's going to be absolutely amazing. So let's get started. Dr. Rowshanak, thank you so much for hosting with me yet again. I always am excited to do this space with you today. It's always my honor. And could you please introduce yourself quickly and also our guest today?
Hi, thank you so much, Jacqueline. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here. I'm Dr. Rowshanak Hashemiyoon. I am a computational, clinical, and behavioral neuroscientist and a transformational consultant and president of and founder of Access to the Path. I am so excited to be here today with my friend and colleague, Sky Nelson Isaacs. He is amazing. And besides being able to tell you that he is fantastic as a human being, I can tell you that he is a learned physicist, an author, and a speaker. He's a musician. He's a father and a husband. And he has spent so much time studying both the science and the spirituality of our world. So I'm super excited to have him come here and talk to us about this topic. He was raised in the study and practice of yoga taught directly by Sri Swami Satchidananda. He he had an early fascination with holograms and some of the most fundamental questions in physics. And so he has spent the last couple of decades working on synchronicity and physics and bringing that all together in the realm of spiritual context and how it works for us. He has been an educator for many, many, many years. He is a multi-instrumentalist and a professional performer of award-winning original musical compositions. He is fantastic. In 2019, he founded the Synchronicity Institute. So this is, his thing. More than somebody who would just have a passing interest. He has not only studied this for decades, but he now has the Synchronicity Institute. And he continues to do research and training there in the science of wholeness, synchronicity, and flow. Sky, we are so excited to have you here with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rowshanak and Jacqueline. It's great to be with you on the program. And I'm really looking forward to talking about my research in synchronicity and the questions that you all have.
Well, thank you so much. And I'll just jump right in if you don't mind. Yeah. So we talk about synchronicity, and you know me, I always like to start with everybody on the same page. So when we're talking about synchronicity, there's a dictionary definition of synchronicity that really speaks to coincidences that are happening that are acausal. The definition in psychology is an occurrence of meaningful coincidences that seem to have no cause, hence acausal. So I would really love it if you could speak to what your definition of synchronicity is and the very practical human aspect of it, starting with what do you mean when you describe synchronicity not merely as acausal, but as meaningful coincidences?
So the traditional approach by Carl Jung is the idea of meaningful coincidences, of acausal connections. And I like that you brought up this word acausal, because I have a strong reaction to acausal. I think the word causal itself is not clearly defined. It's actually a principle we add on to physics. The solutions of physics are not causal. They're actually bidirectional in time. But we add on, like to the Feynman propagator in quantum field theory, we add on this function that cuts off the future and keeps only the past. We do the same thing in wave processing with music. When we convert a wave file to an MP3, we cut it up into pieces in order to be causal. So causality is something we impose because it makes sense to us. We don't have any other context, right? But it sort of takes the form of a law, but it's not really, there's no Newton's law of causality, as far as I know. So I like to be careful about that word. And then acausal is the opposite of that word that we haven't well defined. So what is acausal? Is causal the linear sequence of events? Is it the necessity that one thing transfers energy to another in order? There's no clear specificity. So if you say acausal, it's the opposite of one of those things. I'm not sure which. So I've got a different idea for acausality, which is essentially a holographic or holistic systems theory kind of networking causality. It's like things are still in a causal relationship, but the relationships are more important than we focus on the relationships, not the causality part.
So are you focusing more on correlation than causality?
Yeah, we focus on correlation and causality. And that's a
so causality is really something leading to something else, and that's what you meant by the transfer of energy or information. But correlation is just that connection between those things, right?
So, and synchronicity is an example of a correlation, not a causal phenomenon. And we'll maybe get more into this as we go. But when I met my first physics advisor, like in my graduate program, I wanted to work with this guy because he was brand new to the school, and it was time for me to choose a thesis. And I looked at his background. I was like, this guy works on string theory. He's from the Perimeter Institute. I want to get this guy. I was out there to loop him with my fishing hook. And I show up to class my first day, and I go to the office to see where my class is. I'm standing there staring at the door where the printout is, and suddenly the door opens, and I have to jump back because it's like right in my face. And this guy walks out and starts to like look around and walk away. And I realized that looks like him because I'd seen pictures of him online. And I took that moment. I had a moment of opportunity to go after him, and I decided to. So I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, "Are you my, Kristen Jensen? Are you going to be teaching this class?" So I was the first one to meet him, and it was him. And I kept on that approach, and I was his first graduate student to graduate. So I got my graduate thesis advisor from this process of correlation, right? I didn't cause him to walk out of the door at that time, but there's a correlation between my choices to be in that space, my intention, and my homework that I did to get him in my life, and then the circumstances that showed up to support that.
So what's the difference between that synchronicity and sort of, luck favors the prepared?
And there's no difference, but I'm giving a set of principles in the law. I'm structuring it with the laws of physics. And it comes down to all the laws of physics are correct as they are. And some of my work is ironing out, reformulating those principles in a more cohesive way. But there is a piece about that I sort of add or focus on about the multiverse, right? We've got this idea of the many worlds theory of many branching possibilities. Every choice you make is like a different choose your own adventure. And this is part of modern physics. Most physicists don't look at it as like a really choose your own adventure book, but there's this sense in which the physical universe is constantly diverging. And how those divergences happen and what's the order or organization of those in relative to you is really the study of synchronicity.
So based on what you're saying, which is really interesting, how would you connect that to synchronicity representing the universe's response, if you will, to our intentional choices.
Hmm.
And the idea that
Right.
maybe the universe isn't so random after all.
Yeah, I really like this word you chose, response. I think that we can understand synchronicity. We can let go of that word even if we want to, because that might be a new age kind of philosophy. We can just talk about responsiveness. We live in a responsive cosmos, meaning that the things that happen to us are not necessarily unrelated to our own thought process, our own actions and choices. And I really focus on our actions and choices, right? Not just our thinking, like that's ephemeral, it changes, it's subjective, but especially the choices we make. You know, I was about 10 years ago, I was driving home from work. I worked at a software company and was really debating whether I should leave the job in order to pursue writing a book. And out of a feeling of safety, I decided, I sort of decided to myself, I don't really need the time. I've got enough time to write a book anyway, so I can, take it slowly, stay in my current job. And I remember getting on the phone with my coach and declaring this, like, I get it now. I'm clear. I can stay here and I'm good. Well, the universe heard that, and I mean, not to overuse a phrase, but the next week, there was a shakeup at work where people quit and were fired and left, and all sorts of stuff happened. And there was a vacuum right in the position above me, and the president of the company came to my desk and said, "Do you want to step into a management role?" So suddenly, it sounded exciting, and I did it. And I don't regret that. But suddenly I was working 70, 80 hours a week, and I didn't have time to write my book. So I chose to do that. I chose not to take space for the book writing, and the situations that unfolded in totally unrelated to me, right? But correlated subjectively for me. I felt that there was a deep correlation there, and that made me work harder and learn kind of what that choice meant to me. So meaning becomes part of this, where the relationship between all the pieces, between me and my company, between me and my book, those relationships become the guiding principle that determines what situations unfold. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And just to continue, a year later, I really realized too much. I don't want to do this. And I gave my notice. And I had a great experience leaving the company. They gave me like a year's long consulting work, and it allowed me to transition to go to grad school. So it all worked out. Just took a while.
I love that. I'm just going to highlight that it all worked out, because sometimes the plan is exactly what it should be. And in that choice, it's worked out beautifully. Not have you only written one book, but you've written two now. So I love that.
And I learned along the way, I learned how my choices actually showed up in form, like situations happened in response to that. So this idea of responsiveness sort of takes the mystical nature out of it. It's just saying that there's a way in which the situations that unfold from that many branched multiverse, right? All the different things that could happen. How do we select one from another? So I have some principles that I could lay out there. Would you like me to describe those? Okay. So
yes, please.
The questions we should ask is, quantum mechanics is not about past, present, and future. Quantum mechanics distinguishes actually more between determined and undetermined. If something is known, you have information about it, then you can describe it. You've made some measurement about it. If something is unknown, you can't make a definite measurement. So this idea of definiteness and objectivity comes up. And the statement I would say is, there is no objective definiteness. There's nothing that's objective and definitely true. If you haven't observed it, your observation makes it real. So subjective definiteness is definitely true. So we start with subjective definiteness. And this idea of many branches is something that's true in physics, right? It's called Wheeler's delayed choice experiment, where you measure the end result and it determines the path something has taken. So like when I met my physics advisor, Dr. Jensen, I was standing at the door. He walked out of the door and almost bumped into me. And I saw that moment to introduce myself. But how did he get to that point? Well, he had a whole history of choices that led him there. And how did I get to that point? Well, I'm the subjective person, right? I witnessed the whole thing. So my choices led to him, from my perspective, being on a branch of this multiverse in which he was at that point. He had made choices to get to that point. So I call this retroactive event determination. And this is, the question we need to ask is it possible for the universe to be responsive to us? How would it be possible for the universe to adjust or adapt or be flexible to our choices? And this is how. You've got these many branches of possibility. How you choose to operate can interact with the world at some point to make a measurement. And everything that led to him, Kristen Jensen, being at that point becomes the reality after I make that choice. Retroactive event determination. The retroactive means you're looking back at something that already happened, but it's not fixed or determined yet. And you're determining it by the choices you make. So that's one of the principles. The other question we have to ask is, what if it is possible for the universe to be responsive, how would that work? Why would it happen? And the idea that I've come up with, which goes beyond, what I just said, is really pretty much within standard physics. There's a principle you have to add to that if you want this meaningfulness, which is, of these many possibilities, how do we select the one that's most meaningful? And this comes down to the idea of information. A meaningful choice gives you a lot of information and is related to the idea of entropy, not physical entropy, but more like information entropy distributions. So of all these many possible branches that Kristen Jensen could have been on, I chose a certain choice to be at that doorway, and it made it more possible for him to be also at that point, which might have been very unlikely before. And it's this, here's the added piece you need. I think you have to have some sense of felt experience in physics. Some sense of
what does that mean, felt experience in physics?
It's kind of like intention, but our intentions are not always what we think they are, right? I intend to help my daughter by giving her advice, but I'm not always helping her. So I like to think about felt experience. When I give my daughter advice, or when I'm looking to have a new advisor for my thesis, I'm feeling something. I'm feeling excited. I'm feeling nervous. With my daughter, I'm feeling anxious that she'll make a bad choice and I want to give her advice. These felt inner experiences that we have are highlighting, in my view, all those many branches and saying the ones that are meaningful in relationship to what I'm feeling, those are the ones that are more likely to happen. So there's a sense in which the universe is responding to our inner authentic state, not our intended mindset.
Is there some sort of physics that supports that, energetics or anything?
No, it's a very common idea in many other traditions. The inner world and how it, and I'm giving a voice to that, but there's no sense in physics that contains that.
I mean, theoretically, the idea was that, for example, degeneration of particle would be 50-50. And we see that that's not true anymore with some of these mesons, with in particular, the B meson, I believe it is. And so that threatens to change actually our standard model of physics, right? Which has the four forces that hold the universe together. And that's all about energy, these forces that hold us together. And the idea that it isn't, as it were, random, 50-50. It doesn't show that behavior. Although it hasn't been shown to Six Sigma yet, pretty close. So they're just waiting for that to make the announcement. So where you're talking about a universe that is responding to emotions, because it is true that we are giving off energy. We are electrochemical beings. This is true in neurobiology. This is true of our physiology. And so couldn't there be something that's related to how we put out our intention through a change in our energetic state that then affects, because now here is the causal aspect where things respond to each other, if not react to each other. So is there something that is sort of fundamental in our understanding of physics, even the idea of Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? The observer is always affecting the system.
So here's the key thing that I think people make a mistake about. We tend to use this word like we're sending out energy. We think of physical transformation and transfer of energy from me to you across space and time. And we're assuming a certain nature of space and time. We're assuming a deterministic world, not a reductionist world, one in which everything can be broken into pieces. And I don't think there's any, we've already discovered the gravity force, the electromagnetic force, the strong, the weak nuclear force. There's no other forces. And that's why physicists are so clear that there's no other need to explore, other forms of energy. We're not actually sending energy to each other. I agree with that. What we don't really understand is the nature of holistic systems that have meaningful relationships. And the reason this is important, and this is the work I do, is there's other systems that are holistic or holographic, namely light, traveling at the speed of light. Light, which is the most abundant particle in the universe, as far as I know, doesn't have time associated with it. We measure time as it travels, but it's traveling at the speed of light, at which time and space are not defined. And so there's a sense in which, and you can see this in holograms. You create a hologram of, I did this in college. We built a hologram in the lab, and we filmed an apple or I think a bunny rabbit or a duck or something, a rubber duck. And we took a picture, and then we developed it, and all you have is a bunch of squiggles, like circles interfering with each other, like the surface of a lake. So you have no accessible information, but then you shine the original laser light on it without the duck there, and you look into it and you see the duck as if it's there because the light is being bent around that pattern, and all the light from the entire hologram is converging and conspiring to show you exactly what you had seen in a reductionist kind of way, the details. So holograms and a holographic description of time and space is one in which all of the space and all of the time contribute to each point, to each data point. And as a musician, I grew up playing music and recording and doing audio adjustments and frequencies. And I was mesmerized by the idea that you could take all of the song and change the high frequencies for all of the song. Well, what you're doing there is you're taking the entire time scale of the data, right, for like 5 minutes of music. You're processing it into the frequency domain. You're making an adjustment to the frequency spectrum, like bringing up the highs, and then converting it back to the space domain, to the time domain, and getting a result. It's a holistic change that you made. You made a very specific adjustment to this one region in the frequency domain, and it changes the entire song in the time domain. So there's this holistic relationship that is present even when you listen to an MP3 on your computer. It's present in so much of what we do, and yet it's not really that well understood or examined. And the relationships between the parts of the song in the frequency domain are holistic or holographic. And that's what I think we can see time and space as. And a synchronicity is like a relationship between, a seeming relationship between things that seem to be separate.
Got it. Thank you so much. There's an interesting comment from one of the, sorry?
I was just saying that was a great description of how you take the music and that comes down. So thank you for that, Sky.
So we have a couple of comments I'd like to share with you. And then Jacqueline, I know you have a question for Sky. Janice says, wow, so I have this gift where I will make plans with family and friends for a long time. One thing that happens for me, like clockwork, if I'm invited to dinner with a friend, I either start envisioning the dinner or it doesn't evolve in mind. If the latter happens, the dinner or whatever planned, I can't see that right there, I immediately go back in my mind and realize that's why the dinner fell through. Conversely, if the dinner does come to pass, I have vividly seen myself and my friend at the restaurant we chose in mind. Could this be like what you're talking about choices?
Good question. So the question is whether our visualization of it makes it actual. I don't want to tell you that that's not true because you might have your own experience. What really happens for me that I can sort of describe and relate to in this model of branching trees, I'll give you an example of this. It's like divine scheduling. It's like I'm worried about how my schedule is going to work out. I've started to feel stressed and anxious about it. And then things just change and unfold in just the right way, like Tetris. You fall into place. So an example, last week, I had an Aikido 50th birthday celebration for my Aikido instructor. And I had my nephew who's playing in a high school band. He's really talented. And he was playing at this local venue, which is really famous. And it was like, got to go support him. And they're happening basically at the same time, about an hour away from each other in different cities. And I knew I was going to the celebration for the Aikido because I'd planned it for 3 months. So I just sort of gave myself the permission to not go see my nephew. Well, as I was leaving the dojo thing, which I left early just out of my instinct, right? I ordered pizza for my family who were back home. I wanted to make sure that we had dinner. And I get in the car, and my nephew has called, my other nephew has called me to say, can you get a ride to the concert? And I felt bad, but I was going to say, look, I'm not going. Sorry. But I get to the bottom of the hill on my way home, and the pizza place calls me back and says, you called the wrong pizza place. You ordered the pizza from this one, like across the hill, like in a different city. Said, do you want us to deliver it at your house? And this is the moment when I'm thinking to myself, what is this trying to tell me? Because if they deliver the pizza, I don't have to go get it. My family has, my wife and my daughter have food for dinner. I don't have to be involved, but I've taken care of that. And how long do I have? Oh, I've got 45 minutes to get to the concert. That's exactly how long it's going to take. Wow, I can do it. It's not like I'm supposed to do it, but it all is sort of unfolding with this call from the pizza place, making it possible. And so I look at that and I say, what do I want to choose at this point? And I went and I picked up my nephew and brought him to my my other nephew concert. We had an amazing time. Turns out the one I picked up was his last night in town before he goes to college. So I got to spend time with him. And, it's just a hard, for me, it's all about, in the end, how we grow, how we live our life, how we feel, and the thriving that we can do.
It sounds a lot like, and I know, Jacqueline, you have a question about this. It sounds a lot like we are given the opportunity to express our free will, and we're putting out into the universe the option that we want in order to be able to do that. So it is our free will that we're exercising, and yet it's not completely unbiased, as it were. It's not completely uninfluenced, and it's really us influencing this. And as you were talking about time space, it's like somehow we've sent out that signal to offer the opportunity that we want in the first place. Sounds
well, I think of it as like, previous to this, I made choices to support my nephew in other ways. I care about his music career. I'm a musician. I want to support him. I've showed up. I've given him my keyboard for a while, loaned him some equipment, So there's this way in which I've chosen branches of the tree on which this is happening. Mm-hmm. And it's not magic, and it's not me sending him electromagnetic waves. It's choosing branches on the tree of the metaverse or the multiverse that have this theme or this meaningful relationship between he and I. And so this is another way in which that's unfolding based upon those past choices.
Right.
Well, I want to talk about the tree for a minute. I'm going back to the tree and
synchronicity
the branches. Exactly, the synchronicity. So, and I think, Sky, this is such a really great, unique, and different perspective to give to people, because many of us who travel the spiritual path, we're kind of depending on the thought leaders that you follow in the world. I'm not gonna say it's a linear path, because it's not, but it's a clear path in which you can kind of hop onto and go, yes, that feels right for me, right? The spiritual path and how it unfolds, and how synchronicity also unfolds. And that's what I want to bring into it right now, is that question of well, how much does the divine have to do with this? Earlier you said, well, there isn't a larger energy that's connecting it all together, and that it looks a little bit differently. And you're talking about the tree with the metaverse branches that are coming out. How can we look at, or are you still looking at, a larger connected source that
Yeah.
is part of this. So some people call it God, some people call it divinity, some people, we all have our different words for it, divine. How is that playing? Because I'll say it all the time, is I'll say, it's divine timing. And when I say that, I actually mean it, that I believe there's a bigger, the angels have my back, there's a bigger source, divine source, that is not making the choices for me, because I understand my choices are my choices. That's the free will we get when we come into this human experience. But how are we still in there? Where's the divine guidance in this, or is there?
Well, I think the work I'm doing is like giving a new option. You don't have to talk about energy anymore, because we understand energy very well. And there's no way to track. We haven't found any energy that corresponds to God or the divine that's separate from the energy of like mechanical energy and kinetic energy and chemical energy, nuclear energy. Those are measurable things. But when you think about information.
So are you saying we haven't measured God yet?
Yeah, even though we measured the Higgs boson, that Michio Kaku called the God particle.
That's right.
People are looking for this underlying connecting thing that explains everything, right? And so they look for that and they name it that. But I think what we want to do is pull away from the material world altogether and our understanding of reductionist space-time, where everything is separate in the way that it appears, right? And understand in a holistic or holographic sense how space and time may operate for light, for instance. Gilbert Lewis was a physicist around the same time as Schrodinger. He wrote some papers using the term virtual contact, saying that we are in virtual contact with the sun, because the light leaving the sun does not actually register any space or time in between us and the sun. We do. We measure 8 minutes of time travel. But that is not a reality in the physics of light itself. So there's a sense in which we're in virtual contact with everything that shines on us. And this is consistent with the holographic formulation of things, where you convert something into the frequency domain, and the time and the space represent, distinctions become invisible or non-explicit. The information is still there, but it's not separated in time and space. It's distinguished by its frequency patterns. So I talk a lot about patterns and pattern space. And this, by the way, gets into why does this matter for human experience? Because we also are pattern machines, right? We are living out stories and filters, as we've talked about, Rowshanak, that are ways that we conceive the world. And we do the same responses to the same stimulus every time. And that's a pattern. And synchronicity, then the responsiveness of the universe, is going to bring about a similar response each time. And so we get into these synchronicity loops where we're experiencing the same type of relationship, the same type of, self-sabotage or whatever it might be, same type of job that's unsatisfying, because we're doing making the same choices. So it's not that there's this energy out in the world that we have to tap into, but that we're actually in a metaverse of choices. And those choices relate to each other in different ways. And as we make choices, we move along a journey in which certain things happen that are meaningful to us.
That's I think what I'm loving about this is the first time, Sky, I've heard this explanation. We've had many conversations, but first time I've heard you explain it this way. And I think what I'm loving about it is, first of all, for those people that get stuck on the God, term as it's been used, is it takes that out of it, which is beautiful. And it gives everyone, and this is what Humanity's team talks about all the time, is this beautiful interconnectedness, that we are all fully connected. Mm-hmm. We're only separated by, as you're telling us literally right now, by physics, and how the perception that we're given through our senses. But we do have this ability to step beyond that. And I'm going to take us a little off track for 1 sec, because I just have an extra question I'm going to throw in there, Dr. Rowshanak, if you don't mind, is, that's, it's a big chunk of information for people to take in that are new to this. But I almost feel it's a bit like the Matrix movie, where when you can learn to step off the grid, right? And so was I. I completely got it without even all this depth of knowledge. It made sense to me. So, and I know we're going to get into this a little bit later too, but it's that understanding. And if you've seen the Matrix, is they suddenly step off the grid, right? They step off this human grid and go, oh, I can see how it all works together and how it's all connecting this virtual
and it illustrates this idea
reality.
of retroactivity, where Neo and Trinity make choices as they go through the building looking for the agents and the bad guys. And as they make choices, the Matrix recalculates and determines where are the bad guys. Well, they're actually on this path over here because you chose that. And that's all possible in a computer when you play video games, virtually online. This happens all the time. It's called optimistic synchronization. It's a way that distributed systems can sync up and correlate to each other, even though they're causally separate, and create the illusion of relationship.
And so that's the explanation that you're giving us today, is that in moment by moment, these are happening with the choices that we make, is that causality is just affecting the next thing and the next thing as we travel through space, because really it's not correlated to time in the big picture of things. Time is just a human construct that we have, but less, the time space reality is very different when you're looking at from an energetic perspective and how we're moving through that field.
Yeah, and what I think is my contribution here is like providing a holographic perspective, a framework in which you can see the connectedness. And it's not magic that this person comes into my life at this moment, or the universe responds to my emotion, as Loretta said. But it's something that's coming out of the holism or the connectedness of things. We're all in this relationship, and from that framework, it does make sense that things would adjust and be flexible in this metaverse of tree branches.
Beautiful, beautifully said, Dr. Rowshanak. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So
yeah, thank you for bringing it up that way. I like the Matrix reference.
Yeah, no, it was exactly what I saw when you said that, which was amazing. Thank you.
So, speaking of the Matrix, let's talk about human conflict and our evolution. My question is, we've talked about the human practical aspect of synchronicity and the divine aspect, bringing them together to help bring us into oneness. How do we use synchronicity? Because it is a powerful tool. Or let me ask you this. How does synchronicity address the truth of conflict and the ability for this synchronicity that brings you to conflict, or the opportunity to address conflict, into a space where there can be healing and from their growth and transformation?
One of the things I love about the metaphor and actually the model of a hologram is that a hologram has essentially two realities. There's the space-time reality, which is encoded, that you think you're seeing, and then there's the abstract patterns that give rise to that reality. And that's in a physical hologram when you look at your credit card, for instance. When you look from a different angle at the hologram, you see a different thing. You see a different perspective on the three-dimensional object, as if it was really there. In a similar way, when you and I look at a situation, when we read the newspaper, for instance, we hear about some politician's comment on something. Depending on our background and our own preconceptions and what we believe is true in other things in our life, our values, we're going to have a different interpretation of that. We're going to either like it or not like it. And it's just amazing to me how we can go through the world thinking other people are crazy because they read the same thing as us and they're happy and we're like sad. But this is an aspect of a relational universe or a holographic shift in perspective. If you understand that your context, the stories that you hold as what's actually happening in the world and what the universe is about, influences how you interpret and what meaning you make from your experiences. So this leads me to study, as it's something I know that you study as well, Rowshanak, filters and stories, the way that we perceive things, construct our reality or our meaning, and then respond. And if we're in a responsive universe, then the response that we have to a situation is going to elicit another response from the situation, right? So we're going to if we're not careful, we just react with our patterns, we might cascade into more and more escalated, same old stuff. But if we can understand and see the patterns, we can sort of check into what's really happening, and for us, and make a different decision. So I'll give an example of this. The first time I shared this story, and I think your audience will appreciate it. So Indiana Jones came out this year, and I was really excited because I've been wanting to share that with my daughter.
I love how we're doing the Matrix and Indiana Jones,
Totally.
Physics and the universe.
Yeah, but then we're gonna talk about that, Sky, and how those all interconnect too, right?
Yeah, this show has it all, baby.
Exactly. Rowshanak was singing the songs correlating to all my words earlier today.
So I love bringing in the fun stuff,
Yeah, absolutely. It's great.
And my daughter's 14, and I've been wanting to short Indiana Jones since she was like 5, but she was too young. And it's also dated, it's like not current. So I've learned my lesson showing her stuff that I used to like. But Indiana Jones, the new movie came out, and I was so excited that I invited my whole family, like my cousins, my parents, everybody, my brothers and sisters. And the only people who could come were my stepdad, my mom, my 3 nephews, my daughter, and my wife. So we get to the theater, and this is cool. It's fun. And I have an interaction with my stepdad, which reminds me of like what it was like to grow up with him, and where he gets anxious about the tickets and sort of gets demanding, and I feel like I have to do something about it. And I realized a filter. So the filter I had in that moment was, and I had to do some reflecting on this, but took me some time. But the filter, this is the takeaway. I have to avoid him raising his voice. So whatever he needs, I got to sort of take care of it or respond to it in order to avoid him raising his voice. That's how I reacted to that inside. And just to complete the synchronicity story, I was sitting in the movie with the whole family, and I noticed, wow, I'm actually sitting here watching Indiana Jones like I was when I was 10, with my stepdad and my mom, who are no longer together, and my 5 siblings, or my 4 siblings and me. They were my nephews and my daughter, but it was like the same age kids and me. I was transported back in time by 35 years to be with my family. And I just had this experience with my stepdad, which reminded me of my own need to avoid him raising his voice. So this whole picture just took me back to my inner self that wanted to understand, why am I taking care of people? Why am I reacting in this particular way when, people are bossy or have aggression or something? It helped me relate to myself in a new way. And by seeing that filter, the story in my head, because of this whole experience, which is an external experience, the physical situation of the movies, and the synchronicity gave rise to a healing for me.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, when this reminds me of emergence also in communication, when it's time for something to happen, as it were, and by that it could mean that you're ready for that or you want that now.
Yeah. Done something to invite
then it. Then that opportunity will present itself. You are on that wavelength already, and then that opportunity presents itself, and then you have the opportunity to address that.
Yeah.
And in getting into that uncomfortable coincidence or meaningful coincidence of this is what's been going on with me, which is what prepares you for that moment of transformation, then there's the opportunity. So now you get into that opportunity, like it or not, and there's of course conflict. And the difference this time is that you are ready to move forward from that wound. So you can address the conflict. You can, in whatever way, either directly or internally or externally, explicitly, implicitly. And in seeing that, based on the state that you're already in, and receiving that, you now can address the conflict, heal the wound, and move into a new space of being, into releasing some stories that occurred when you were young, when you were ill-equipped, whether because you're still creating your world model.
That's a beautiful, I want to highlight that.
Yeah.
People are still creating their world model, and synchronicity allows
Yes.
them to feel empowered to do that.
Right. And so we as children we don't know anything. We don't even know our arms and legs belong to us as babies. In fact, after a few months, when we learn how to grab, it takes another few months before we learn how to let go. So our children are forever hitting themselves in the head with their rattles or whatever. They literally don't know how to release once they've learned how to grasp. So there's a lot of neurodevelopment going on in the first years of life. We develop a sense or an identity of self, and a paradigm or a model of the world and how we fit in it. And that also includes, so much of the dynamic with our immediate family in whatever shape, way, or form that presents itself. But our brains are still developing, as well as us trying to understand this representation, this holographic universe. And as Carl Pribram would say. And so instead of this everything being fixed, we have opportunities to receive what's happening as we go through our own lives, as we get older and over time, that then give us the chance to revisit and resolve. So
I agree.
What in terms of conflict, this is something that we don't think about, that person showed up just then, and because all you're thinking is but that leads to something else. And sometimes you don't realize consciously, of course, that you need that or not.
Totally agree.
But that nonetheless doesn't negate the truth of it being, this is what you wanted, this is what you called in, this is what you're ready for. And when you, as Jacqueline likes to say, lean into it, then you have a golden opportunity, instead of going, again, like Thanksgiving or the holidays, like, oh my gosh, you could be the CEO.
We blame it on the family member, right? Oh, they're still like this. This is their fault. They're still like this.
Well,
right?
I was
and
just
it
going to
has
say,
nothing to do with us. Yeah.
First of all, yes, 100%. But also, you could be, an adult, you've gone off into the world, you run a company, you're making tons of money, there's hundreds, if not thousands of people underneath you. Maybe you're the CEO of Nike, I don't know, but you go home and you're 9 years old again. And you're having the same
I love that.
again.
Right? How many times does that happen over every holiday season with your
there's
family?
A power to the environment. I think the synchronicity, and Sky, tell us if we're right, is when a certain moment brings you into more of a state of presence, it just hits a little differently. It may hit very hard, or it may just sort of tickle you in a way that you're like, sort of wakes you up to that moment. And you either step into the conflict and now it's a different navigation, or there's an internal shift in you that causes, again, a different pattern to express itself, that offers the opportunity now to change that world model that you had, because you're a part of that world model, because you and the other person or the environment or whatever the conflict includes are now taking a different trajectory. Is that?
Yes. And what the holographic model gives us is the sense that the principle that everything is affecting everything else. So when you do a Fourier transform, you take all of the wave signal in time.
That's right.
You integrate it in a certain way to give you one data point in the frequency space. So each data point from frequency space comes from a different entire contextual scan of the time domain. In this, metaphorically, let's say, just for the moment, in what you're describing with family, you're a boss of a large company and you come home and you're 9 years old. Recognizing, the gift I can give you from this model today to the listeners is, a model that supports the notion that everything you experience is part of the same dynamic. So if you have a pattern that's in you around how you relate to authority or how you relate to being challenged, it's going to show up in your personal relationships with your kids, with your spouse, with your parents, with your colleagues and coworkers, with your relationship to politicians and leaders, and strangers. It's like the patterns that show up everywhere in our life are reflective of how we're feeling inside. And that's what that's the curriculum we can work on. And there's so many opportunities to change, right? Because it's going to show up in all these places.
I love that synchronicity gives you an opportunity to change your story, to change the story, to become aware of the stories.
That's why I went into studying it. That's why it was such a draw for me. And I had so much growth from noticing who came into my life at certain moments. And instead of blaming life for doing this to me, is there a bigger underlying pattern that I can actually grab onto and understand? And that led me to trying to understand space and time itself.
Everything being so relational. Yeah, go ahead, Jacqueline.
I just wanted to comment, and this is for the benefit of our listeners as well, because I know many conversations here on Humanity's Team before would have talked about the shadow and the light work, and just using it in a different context. So I wanted to make that connection for our listeners as well, as when you've heard different conversations from different guests on Humanity's Team, you've heard about shadow and light work. And this ties right into, if I'm understanding correctly, Sky, and obviously the way you're speaking of it, is that shadow and light work, and how we can, when things keep showing up for us in these patterns, as you described with your uncle, that's the shadow that just needs the light. And in that moment in time, you were able to shine the light on the circumstance to say, oh, I'm recognizing this pattern. I'm seeing it now for what it was in my childhood and how it's now continued all the way through my life. Oh, here it is. I see you now. That's the beautiful awareness piece and this consciousness piece that, again, here at Humanity's Team, I'm just tying the language together that it's, this is exactly what's talked about here all the time in Sky's beautiful way, that he's tying it together in another perspective for us to really take in on a different level. And I love that, Sky, because I'm connecting all these pieces now, and it makes me so excited that I can see it in a different way too. And how many of those beautiful points you're making, where I can go, oh yes, I just had this moment in time where that happened, and this moment in time and this happened. And the difference of how I may have reacted to it. Well, maybe 10 years ago, I never shone that light on it. Maybe I didn't have that awareness or that consciousness, but now I do. And I can see how beautiful the shadows are. Just, it's like, poof, they're just gone. The light comes in and then it's gone. And there's a beautiful release and an expansion. And we were talking a lot about, Dr. Rowshanak, we were talking a lot about expansion last week with our guest. And that ties into as soon as we put the light onto the shadow,
a living, non-random universe.
Right? We've now expanded. We've now created this expansion. So I'm just making the tie into the audience so that they're seeing it's the same conversations viewed a different way in that hologram that Sky's giving us from a different view today. And I love that, Sky. So thank you.
And it's so practical is what I love about it. Like, because when you talk about shining the light, it's a metaphor, right? It's a great metaphor because I use light in my research. I love it, but it's still easy to grab onto and hard to really understand what it means. And in the context of my story with the Indiana Jones movie, it meant for me making the statement to myself, I have to avoid him raising his voice. That was my shadow. I feel a compulsion to do something to avoid somebody else having their experience. They're doing something to me. And that story, or that way of interpreting everything, is controlling me and has been controlling me for a long, long time, since my childhood. So shining the light metaphorically means understanding this story that's in me that keeps being reflected by my experiences. And then once I see it, this is the great thing. Once I see it and go, oh, wow, that happens so much when this person has an experience that says, I'm happy that it's raining outside and I have to somehow change that, It's like it brings tension in my life all the time. Once I see it, then I automatically have more options. I don't have to change it right away, but I have more options to feel a little bit more loose and open about it.
So you were talking about the practical aspect of it, and we're getting closer to the end. And I see we have your link up. This is the link you'll see at the bottom of the screen for Sky's Synchronicity Institute and a free course that he offers called livinginflowcourse.com. So I invite you to check out those links so you can connect further with Sky and with his course. And we're getting close to the end of our time. So I like it. I like to call it, Jacqueline and I, we like to call it the get off the couch.
Get off the couch moment. Yeah.
Get off the couch moment. So what can we leave our audience with respect to the different insights you've offered? What action can they take? How can they use synchronicity as a tool to improve their lives?
To get off the couch.
That's an important question.
Yes.
Synchronicities, when you first start noticing them, they seem to come from nowhere. Like, oh, I'm supposed to go to the movies with my family or something. But actually, or the situation with my nephew and going to the concert, actually, that was a result of many months and years of investing in that relationship with my nephew, which brought the opportunity about for me to visit him that day. I'm saying that there's this correlation over time. And I call this symbolic momentum. Momentum is this idea in physics that things, once they get going, they keep going. And they don't just suddenly happen. They have to build up in momentum. And symbolic momentum means sort of the symbolism or the meaningfulness of things has a momentum also. So notice, here's what you can do. You can do a practice where you notice the symbolic momentum in your life. In other words, what themes are you acting on? What's up for you in your life? What's happening in your relationships consistently in different relationships, kinds of arguments or kinds of conversations or questions that are coming up? And especially, what choices are you making? Mm-hmm. So you can look at the last week, make a list of the places you spent your time. I did laundry and housework, every day for an hour or two. I went to work. I spent time with my kids. I didn't work on my school studies. I should have, I feel a little bad. I didn't work on school. So there's something you didn't do as well. And then so you got a list of the things that you've invested in, and then look at the outcomes that you want. I really want to graduate my school program. Well, that's not aligned with the fact that I didn't invest any time in that program. So noticing the mismatch or the matching between what you're investing in your life with your choices and what you really want for yourself. And then with the trust of this process of synchronicity, adjust your time spent on the things that you really want to get the outcomes, and you'll start to see synchronicities unfold to give you more of that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Sky. Again, if you'd like to connect with Sky, we have the 2 links that you can connect with him at the Synchronicity Institute, and also to take a free course that he's offering with the link that's on the right. And you can also pick up, he's written 2 books, one called Living in Flow, The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World, and the other called Leap to Wholeness, How the World is Programmed to Help Us Flow, Heal, and Adapt. So I recommend very much that you take advantage of the books and the information on the Synchronicity Institute and the free program that Sky offers. And I will come over to you, Jacqueline, to see if we have final thoughts from you and from Sky.
Well, thank you. And Sky, is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with before I do the final closing up for today? If there was one thought that you could leave with everyone to take back with them today, what would that be?
I love that you brought up dark and light, and if you can expand your sense of self to include both the dark and the light, and see this as a journey through a metaverse, and trust the process and watch for the synchronicity and learn from each experience.
That's perfect. We're all going to take that with us today. And I know I'm going to take it into my world. Actually, I do every day. And feel like you've just solidified all of that for me today. Sometimes Dr. Rowshanak and I say there's this beautiful combination between knowledge and knowing. And I feel like you brought that both together for me today personally. So thank you so much.
Wonderful.
And thank you for being with us. I always enjoy my time. I always deeply learn from you, and get a new perspective into this journey for myself. So thank you. You gave me a whole new hologram to look at today, which I'm excited about. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And just before we wrap up, if you haven't taken a look or signed up yet for Humanities Stream Plus, I'm going to, today encourage you to go and do that. This is one of the largest not-for-profit streaming platform globally that is going to do exactly what we were here doing today, increase that awareness and the consciousness of the world. And what we know is that the world needs us right now. It is the shift that needs to happen. And Sky, you've just amplified that for us all today, that when we begin to do that, our lives individually become better, and then the world becomes better. So thank you so much for that. I'm also going to encourage you all, go take a look at Neil Donald Walsh and Steve Farrell. They've just created a new free online training program. This is a great example of who Humanities team, I'm getting that stuck today. Humanities team, yeah, it's easy for me to say. Humanities team is that they're constantly putting out these free masterclasses, free programs. Well, this one is with Neil and Steve Farrell. It's a free new online training program called Accelerating Your Conscious Evolution. And again, ties right into what we're saying today. And just another little hint, if you would like to join Rowshanak and I again today, every Wednesday, we actually host Neil Donald Walsh on the social audio app called Clubhouse, social audio app called Clubhouse. It's an easy download. I don't know what's with my words today. You left me speechless, Sky, tripping over my words. But every Wednesday at 1 p.m. PDT time and 4 p.m. EDT time, we host Neil Donald Walsh. We have an hour with him live. You get to come up and ask questions. You can be part of the conversation. It just continues this beautiful flow that we always gain here on Humanities Team live events on Wednesday. So we invite you to check that out today. We would love to see you there, and we'll have conversations about conversations with God, and some new books he has coming out as well. He's just had a new one coming out. He's got another one coming down the line. So most of all, we look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday. Steve will be back, but Dr. Rowshanak and I are going to be hosting more and more of these live events as well. And we're looking forward to that time with all of you. So thank you so much for being here, Sky. Once again, namaste, my friend. And thank you.
My pleasure, Dr. Rowshanak and Jacqueline. Thank you so much.
What a treat having you here. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us today.
Have a beautiful day, everybody. On purpose. Now you know you can do it. Bye.